Welcome to the Agent of Wealth podcast with Mark Bautis from Bautis Financial. In this podcast, Mark helps guide you towards financial freedom, ensure you never run out of money, and create a balance in life that prioritizes what is most important to you. Join us for this journey as Mark draws from years of expertise and guest experts to solve the multiple wealth building challenges involved in your financial life.
Welcome back to the Agent of Wealth. On today's episodes, we brought back John and Kira. We have our third installment of our book club, where today we'll be talking about Elon Musk, Tesla, SpaceX, and the quest for a fantastic future. John and Kira, how are you?
Good, Mark. How are you?
Hello, Mark.
Yeah, so Kayla's off on assignment today studying for her CFP. She'll be back on the next one. John, looking forward to talking about this one. Elon Musk is definitely an eccentric character. This is the one you picked, so I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, to say the least. Yeah, it was a good one to give Kayla off because, as I know, the first thing that you guys came down on me was the length of the book and the amount of information. And I think the size of the book really just lends to like how interesting, like how much this guy was involved with. And interestingly enough, the book ended, years ago, and he's gone on to do so much more. So the book could probably be twice as long. I really picked this book just because, really, he's been in the news so much. And, not even just him, but like some of his companies, obviously. SpaceX is doing a lot of really cool things. I'm down in Florida now, so we actually get to see like the SpaceX launches from our backyard.
Cool.
And just Tesla, just kind of, even in the financial world, just aside from like, how great you might think their cars are and how you feel about electric cars, like their stock is just, is like in a space of its own right now. So I was really, just didn't know a lot about them. So I just thought it'd be cool to kind of just take a deeper dive. And I was actually surprised to learn certain things that I knew he was involved with Tesla and SpaceX, but he's involved in so much more than that. And he just has he's just had a crazy interesting life. So, with that said, there's so much in the book, and I really just didn't have any specific questions for you guys, but I thought I would just turn it over to you and just let you tell us a little bit about like what you thought was the most interesting and some of the things about him and the book that really stood out to you. So if you don't mind starting, Kira, I'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. I think a good place to start also is just talking about the story of how the book came to fruition. The author, Ashlee Vance, did a good job of convincing you that this is a great story right off the bat when he said that he didn't want to ask Elon for permission to write the book. He was going to do so regardless of if Elon was willing to sit down for an interview with him or not, because he just wanted to write the story and he was so compelled by Elon's drive. And I think ultimately that's what won over Elon's respect for the author and in giving his permission to collaborate with him on the book. It was sort of like a foreshadow into how Elon operates in his business. So I thought that was really compelling. It's a biography, the book, so it's not something that I'm super familiar with reading. I haven't read a biography in a while. But I felt like it was very great in total about covering topics of business and life. And I thought it was crazy that the author interviewed over 300 people, current employees, ex-employees, family members. So it revealed a lot of Elon's ideas, models, systems, habits, also dove into his childhood. And I just, in all, I was surprised by how much I liked it because I did not know much about Elon going into it.
Biographies actually used to be my favorite type of book to read when I was, I guess, kind of getting into working. And I found it fascinating to see stories of where someone was, where they came from to where they got to. One of my favorite biographies is one on Mike Tyson. I've read some on military leaders, and you kind of get their, a feel for someone, what makes them. And so this one was a great one too, because he's definitely an interesting character. Obviously wasn't in the book, but now that he's become either the richest person in the US or richest person in the world just yesterday, he sends Jeff Bezos an image through Twitter of a second place trophy. And really, I think what it was part of was that Jeff Bezos at some point in the past talked a little bit about Tesla's business model and how he didn't like it or this or that. And you can just tell the competitive, and Kira, you mentioned it earlier about his drive. And I think that's one thing I pulled from this, not just this book, but if you look at some of these other successful people, it's, I don't know if a passion is the right word or if it's like relentless pursuit, but that's what Musk had or has to all of these things, whether it's, people quoted in the book saying that they've never actually seen him outside his office. And the guy would just spend 18 hours, sleep on the couch. And it's, just goes back to that pursuit that he has. And I kind of thought of another book I've read called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. In that book, Hill talks about that's a similar thing that if you want to get to wherever you're trying to get to, you have to have that relentless pursuit of it. But, you also probably have to give something up to get there. And it's probably true for Musk too, is that he's had to give up things during the way, but he has that vision and he really walks that vision and he's completely dedicated to it.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, that's kind of where I was with the book, and I do have a fascination with people who, have this story. Like we've talked about David Goggins, like he came from this like really bad upbringing, being beaten by his father, and just, it really just like kind of, I don't know, just reminds me of like Rocky, like the comeback story, like, just makes you feel good, but you also get some color around like what really means to be. So you hear a lot of people talk about, you have to work hard to be successful. Yeah, sure. But I think that at a certain level, you don't, sometimes you just don't know, or it's like good to see like what that really means. And it's way more extreme in this case than I ever imagined. And it's not just the idea of you're working hard, but being able to block out the noise that was going on around him. There was people just making jokes about Tesla and how it was like a sinking ship. And it's one thing to have a couple of people like mumbling in the corner about it, but like this is like the media, coming down on him, and he's broke. Yeah. But that he still found a way to kind of continue. And when he was, not only was he working hard, but he was like really down and out, where like most people probably would have been like, all right, this is over. Like we can't make the payroll. So I thought that there was that part of it, like, adding a little, as far as like just that kind of drive and that craziness almost, but like also the idea that like you have to block out those things that are just like seem like you're done.
And I think this happened after the book was written, but Tesla went from basically not making it to now being the 6th or 7th most valuable company in the US. So it's a crazy transition story of how someone just wouldn't quit, stuck with it. I think we're all accustomed to, we all love that instant gratification or that instant success or short-term success. And sometimes it's just not possible. Sometimes things do take time. And I think that's something that we all have to, kind of realize that, things don't just happen immediately. There's a lot of things that factor into, how something is going to play out and whether it's successful or not.
And there's also his personal life, which was also like just kind of overlapping with all of that. I mean, you forget he's living this crazy life, and he has all these kids, and he's still like, he's flying around. And, I thought the book did a really great job of like helping you understand he's working 18 hours. There's this part in the book where the author was interviewing him. He was at the time single, I think, and he was like, I'm thinking about like looking for a girlfriend. And he's like, what do you think? Do you think a girlfriend is like, 10 hours a week? What do you think? Like, what do you think she's going to expect? And he's like so calculating on like, am I going to have that 10 hours? Or, he's like looking at like what the girlfriend is going to like literally take up in his week. It really put a lot of color around the way the guy's mind really worked. I mean, almost bizarre, but at the same time, I guess that's just the way that he's like thinking about things when you're running two companies like that.
Yeah, that part wasn't super relatable. I feel like it's worth mentioning that he's not very relatable at all. I'm 25 years old, so I'm only a few years into the workforce. And I feel like I hear a lot of conflicting advice of like, when you're on your deathbed, you're never going to remember how much you worked, or you're never going to be proud of how much you worked. And then there's someone else who's like the Elon Musk of the world that's like, never take a day off, always be the hardest worker in the room. And I think what makes his drive and his like need to always work and go so meaningful is the fact that there's this greater purpose of changing the world and making the world something better. And I think that's like, talk about like having a why, you know what I mean? Like he wants to make the world more sustainable. If the world as we know it comes to an end, we can always head over to Mars. Like, I just think that his quote unquote why is just like something that's like so incredible. And that's what makes his work ethic so impressive, is that like he really has this meaningful goal and greater purpose that I think a lot of people don't have at all.
Yeah, and I think it's not just his vision, right? He's wants to colonize Mars. He wants to build these autonomous, self-driving electric cars. He wants to build tunnels between cities. It's one thing having a vision, but there's so many doubters to him. And he basically just says, screw it. This is what my vision is, and I'm just going to plow through until I realize my vision. So I think that was one of the most impressive things. And the other thing, too, that I found impressive about him is that he's not just preaching this from some stand somewhere. He's doing it himself. He eats his own dog food. If that, he doesn't ask the people working for him to do things that he wouldn't do himself. And I think that's, a great quality to have as a leader. You see it a lot in someone like the military, but, to see it with a CEO of a company or multiple companies, I think that's impressive as well.
We talk about eating your own dog food. I mean, after the PayPal, he made his first big chunk of money. He literally took every penny, dumped it right into his next project. And at the time, I'm sure people were just like cringing, like, oh my God. And you think about going to space, putting people into space, obviously hindsight's 2020. We're like, yeah, it's great. Like they're seeing some success. But 10, 15 years ago, I remember thinking like, who does this guy think he is? Like NASA goes to space, this is never going to happen, and if it is like, he can barely get Tesla. Like it was just, there was just so much doubt. And even from every level, but he figured it out in the end.
Yeah. And just on the space topic, I think that's what we're seeing is that, you're seeing whether it's Musk, whether it's Bezos, we're seeing a lot more private space exploration. Whereas in the past, a lot of it was done through the government, through NASA. So maybe that's a path forward and it just becomes more and more, prevalent with how we explore space.
Well, and I tend to right now be very skeptical on the Mars thing. Probably thought this about space exploration. Obviously, Mars is a whole different story, but if anybody can do it, I guess at this point it's him. I also want to just add to what Kira was saying is he's clearly a flawed character too. I didn't know whether to love him or hate him while I was reading, just because it seemed like he was terrible to a lot of his employees. He was so focused, and it was at a lot of cost. Even his first marriage, his assistant, who was supposed to be what was the Iron Man's, what's her name? She was her assistant. It was Gwyneth Paltrow. They make a reference to that, and it made a lot of sense. They're supposed to be together forever. And apparently he maybe in some way turned his back on her. And you start to realize that, there's flawed characteristics that came into play, and he was cutthroat in a lot of ways. So I was a little conflicted when it came to that, for sure.
Yeah, I agree. There were stories about, him on the spot firing people, being so loud in the conference room with someone that the whole office can hear him yelling. And I think it would have been interesting to see some self-reflection in the dialogue between the author and Elon about that. I think that would have been an added element of this book that would have been very interesting to read, and maybe something that was kind of missed out on. Yeah, he definitely was very cutthroat, and I think it would have been nice to know a little bit more about his human behavior. We learned a lot about his upbringing, and that he went through some negative treatment when he was a child, whether it was with his family structure. I think at one point, something that they couldn't even name in the book, and then the themes of bullying. But it would have kind of been cool to see that come full circle with some self-reflection.
That reminds me, one of the things that I, made me really kind of think about his biography was he was recently on Saturday Night Live. And he made the statement, I'm the first host of Saturday Night Live that has Asperger's. I thought to myself, wow, it's clear, and as you start to read the book, that there's maybe there's just a separation, obviously, between the way he thinks and the way somebody who doesn't have autism thinks. And, that separation is really just kind of embedded in the confusion as to our the little understanding we have about autism and like how he's operating. But, often wonder, like, is that part of what drives him? Because he's able to like block out these things that normal people would let, either bother them, or he's like, did it add to his focus?
That's a very good point.
Kira, you mentioned about bullying. I thought recounting that story I think that was when he first moved to Canada. And, John, you were talking earlier about how calculating he is, but it was interesting to hear how he was calculating at the time that bullying experience and how the different thought processes of it is how he can avoid it or how it happened. I think, whether you're the world's richest person or, you're running these companies, some people, it's just, they're just going to bulldoze over everyone and everything in front of them. That's what's necessary to get there. You hear similar stories about Jeff Bezos, how he got Amazon to where it is. But I think the one other thing that stood out is his perfectionism. I guess if you're creating autonomous cars, you would hope they're perfect. But I think that's another thing where you hear kind of opposite sides. You hear some people that say, perfection is the enemy. And when you try and be perfect, you get nothing done because it's never good enough, or you're always trying to make it perfect. Whereas him is the opposite approach. He wants perfection and he won't stop until there is perfection. So, there's always kind of two sides of looking at everything. But that character trait of him was, definitely something that's interesting, because it's always, should you try and be perfect, or should you be just good enough, or, at what level should you strive for?
Yeah, he was shutting some people down. Like some of those meetings he would talk about, and like he said, sometimes they'd be like 5 minutes long. Like he would be like, what is this? Like, and just like, and just leave. Obviously, like you're saying, autonomous cars, and you're just like the look of the car and all those things, like, how much that really did play into it. And funny enough, I found it like not ironic, but like our first book that we did, was the first book, The Infinite Game?
Second.
Was that the first one we did? The second one, sorry. Like this is the complete opposite. Like, but at the same time, there is, the specific, the person that actually is drawn towards that, like Kira said, like changing the world, wanting to be a part of a big tech company, like they hung in there because of those things. So it was like almost like its own chapter in The Infinite Game. And I do believe there's a lot like Jobs, where like in the beginning, if he wasn't so cutthroat, like would it really be where it is today? I mean, you like to think so, but I'm just not so sure, unfortunately.
Yeah. We
could talk about this book forever. The biggest takeaway for me is really just back to really what Mark was saying, and like, I'm just like fascinated with like how just the characteristics and what's common between him and, a lot of these, like you said, Jeff Bezos, some of these other really successful people, if you may, that are in there. And it's just like that relentlessness, like that you see. And I thought it was like really great and refreshing to kind of get in there. And the guys, we're trying to grow our business and just see like, hey, like you don't necessarily have to act like the way he is, like super cutthroat, but it's incredibly hard. You take for granted how you see somebody who grew like a business to where they are, and talk about the iceberg. Like you see the iceberg, but you don't know like what's going under, what happened underneath, and what's going on underneath, and like what it really took, all the times you might have doubted yourself and all those things. So, in the end of the day, like I think that was really like my biggest takeaway. Our next installment is going to be up to colleague Kayla, who has already said is getting ready. Has been studying really, really hard for the CFP. We gave her a rest on the thick book she's going to be choosing for us. So I guess we'll stay tuned to hear from her, and definitely keep an ear open if you want to continue to join us and maybe read along.
Thank you for listening to the Agent of Wealth podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Bautis Financial. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional financial planning and investment advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investments and financial planning.